Good morning everybody, and a warm welcome to yet another Baltic Breakfast, coming to you from a studio here in Stockholm. Today we are going to learn more about nutrient flows, and we're going to look at the Danish example, because they've done so many great actions in Denmark trying to reduce leakage from agricultural land and combating eutrophication. My name is Gun Rudqvist and I work as Head of Policy at the Stockholm University Baltic Sea Center. And we who organize these Baltic Breakfasts, we are of course a research unit here at Stockholm University Baltic Sea Center, and we work with all different major environmental problems of the Baltic Sea and trying to combat these problems from source to sea. And we also do a lot of work on outreach, trying to get interesting science out into the general public and also trying to reach stakeholders involved in policy processes. So these Baltic Breakfasts is part of that work. Of course, as always, you will be able to ask questions, and we very welcome questions, of course, on this interesting topic. You can either put them through mail, and you will see the mail address on the screen, ostersjocentrum.se. But you can also use Twitter, hashtag Baltic Breakfast. You could go to Ostersjocentrum and then hashtag Baltic Breakfast, or use the Slido, and the code is 22102, 22102. And the code and the number will appear on the screen. As always, we will do our best to try to answer these questions during the broadcasting, but if we don't manage, and we hope we get lots of questions, we will try to put down answers and present them on the web, so keep an eye on what's happening on the web. But let's go straight to today's topic. Well, we all know adding nitrogen and phosphorus to agricultural land is necessity, of course, to get a good crop. But excess use of nutrients and the mishandling of manure creates well-known problems. Leakage of nutrients to surrounding waters, and this is of course causing eutrophication. Nothing new about this. What's new the last period of this spring, this unfortunate spring, is of course the intense policy discussion due to the Ukraine war. The Ukraine war inflicts on prices of mineral fertilizers and other inputs, leading to an even more stressful economic situation for farming. And the debate has been intense on agriculture. You know, what is the way forward? How are we going to solve these problems? Maybe a more intense discussion than maybe ever before, for a long time anyway. Unfortunately, strong voices are also being raised to actually reduce the demands presented, for instance, through the European Green Deal and the Farm to Fork strategy of reducing the efforts of addressing nutrient leakage. So we know we have these pushes to actually, reduce the demands on agriculture. But on the other hand, we all know that the Sustainable Development Goals have not at all been reached. So we were thinking that improved usage of the really important nutrients would actually be good both for the economy of agriculture and for the environment. And what can research then tell us about trying to get rid of the dependence of these inputs? How can you work with nutrient use efficiency, improving the nutrient use efficiency? So we contacted, our excellent researchers as always, and we will look today at Denmark as an example. Denmark is very interesting because there the nitrogen situation, the leakage to water is on the agenda, on the public agenda. And I wish I could say the same here in Sweden. So today we're going to look at the Danish example, and we will focus on nitrogen since that's on the agenda in Denmark. So let's forget about phosphorus for a short while. To start with, I'm glad to welcome Gitte Blicher-Mathisen, who is a researcher and a senior advisor at Department of Ecoscience at Aarhus University. And Gitte will introduce us to the Danish situation and describe what actions have been taken to reduce nutrient leakage. And when you've gotten that picture about what's happened in Denmark, we will go on, and Benoit Dessirier, who is a researcher here at Stockholm University Baltic Sea Center, will complement this with a presentation about the contribution of agriculture to nitrogen loads to water bodies and groundwater, and also present results of modeling nutrient flows looking at 3 Danish drainage areas. So by modeling, the sustained effect of past practices can be better understood, and maybe also then you can learn more about if current policies will have an effect. So that's the broad picture, but I will give the floor directly to Gitte Blicher-Mathisen. Please, Gitte, very warm welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'll try to find my presentation here. Just a minute. I think I need to put it on the other screen. Sorry for that. Yeah. So can you see my slide now? Thank you very much for the introduction. Can you hear me now?
Sorry, Gitte, just a minute. It doesn't look like I'm looking at the technicians here. No, it's not being shared right now. Sorry about that. And sorry, the audience. This is the backside of not having everybody in the studio. But on the other hand, we're working sort of to reduce our climate impact by not having everybody travel. Now here it's coming along. So
good.
Great. Yeah, in a short while I think we'll have the slide. Yes, thank you, Gitte. Now it's excellent.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, my presentation about the agricultural regulation in Denmark. As Gunn told you, we have quite high focus on the inloading to coastal waters, and that is because agriculture is quite intensive in Denmark, and it covers 60% of our land area, so it has quite a big impact on the ecological state of our waters. Therefore, the yearly nitrogen loading to coastal waters is almost the second most important figure every year, next after the Danish gross national product. So it has quite a focus in Denmark, and we very often see articles and news about inload in papers and television and about ecological issues in our waters. So example on this press release here is for 2017, that there were more nitrogen coming to the marine waters than expected, so it has a quite big news impact. The nitrogen load to coastal and marine waters has stepwise decreased during the monitoring year from 1990 to until today. So you see here the figures that it has stepwise reduced the load by a number of mitigation measures. Most reduction was in the beginning of this monitoring period until about 2005, and after that almost very little has happened. So we see here all our monitoring station that covers about 60% of our land. So we have quite good monitoring network, and we also have a monitoring that distinguishes between sources, that agriculture and point sources have an impact on the load. In this figure, we can see more in detail that here I have divided the monitoring things. So the discharge in the water in the streams are on the x-axis, and the inload for Denmark, the diffuse inload on the y-axis. And all the orange line and dots here is in the first action plans. So this relation has this relationship. And then we introduce mitigation measures, better manure handling, slurry tanks, spring application of manure, catch crops, etc. So the green line here is from the period 1990 to 2006. And then the last about 10 years, 20 years is the 10 years is this blue line here, and not much has happened, so we don't have a new line that is lower. The parliament has just passed a new regulation of agriculture in Denmark that also take into account some climatic issues. And we need a goal for the Water Frame Directive in 2027. And the plan here is now to have a design of a new regulation here in the beginning of the plan, and an implementation stepwise, and a half-time evaluation of measures, and then hopefully a fulfillment of the Water Frame Directive goal here in 2027. The new farm level regulation is based on field surplus balance at farm level, and then a calculation of the losses to the both to the boot zone and to the coast. And then we think that there will come some regulation of that farmers need to cut this inload to fulfill the Water Frame Directive. But this regulation model is under development, so we don't know quite exactly what will come in. We have this level for load as a mean for 2016 to 18. Then we have a baseline that includes the decrease, a forecast of decrease in the crop area and other elements that decrease the load. And then we have this target of 9 kilogram N per hectare for the Water Frame Directive. So we still have quite a gap to come to the goal of the Water Frame Directive, and that's why we need more mitigation measures. The regulation so far in Denmark is that we have a general regulation that is even on all farm areas. So this general regulation is not targeted to specific catchments have too high inload to the coast, but it all includes both the N quota, handling of manure, mandatory cat crops, and later soil tillage and other elements. Then we have a targeted N regulation that is targeted to catchments that have too high load to the coastal areas, and also targeted to lower retention areas. And that is so far mainly catch crops and alternatives to catch crops. Then there's also collective nitrogen regulation that is also targeted to coastal areas that need more cut in the inload, and that is mainly wetlands, constructed wetlands, afforestation, and organic soils. In handling all these catch crops, we try to focus it on areas that need groundwater protection, as you see here on this map, and also to locate catch crops with low retention and some with higher retention. So we have a stepwise implementation of the catch crops, so they are placed on more areas with low retention, and therefore it has higher effect on the inload. To give an overview of the field surplus on national level, we have this figure here that the yellow is the harvest and the green bar is the field surplus. And the recent year here is 17, 18, 19, 20. So we have this decrease for about 20 years. And then we have a new regulation that farmers were allowed to put more fertilizer in 2016. And it has increased the balance, but also some other mitigation measures as organic farming and decrease in areas and so on. So it has, to a certain extent, leveled out. To counteract this excess in fertilizer, this catch crop was introduced, were more targeted catch crops. And you see here how the area of catch crops has increased during the years from 2005 to today, and this increase will continue after this year. Focus on the N retention has quite a high impact, and right now we try to make this N retention map more detailed. So far, we have a map that is on 15 square kilometer catchment, and we try to lower this level. So you have a mean for the catchment, but within a catchment we have a variation in the end retention. And if it is possible to have a better map, you can locate catch crops, for instance, to areas below retention, and then have a higher load, higher cut in the load. So here is the end retention with different scale, and there's uncertainty also here on those maps. So even though we have a higher uncertainty, we will then have a higher effect if we can target the catch crops to low end retention areas. We have this new regulation in 2027, so this is a wrap of what will go on. We have this target regulation for catch crops. We have rain filter technologies as constructed wetlands, intelligent buffer zones, as well as restoration of riparian wetlands. And all those mitigation measures and technologies have a quite good documented effect, but we realize that it takes a long time to implement. We also have rewetting of organic soils in river valleys and peatlands. So this new regulation also take into account the combat of climate change. And then we still have regulation that is general, that we introduce higher utilization of nitrogen in manure in 2021, and other initiatives that also cut the use of fertilizer. I think that was my presentation.
Thank you so much, Gitte. It's obvious that Denmark has been active in trying to combat eutrophication. How come the focus is on nitrogen, or is it just that we are today talking about nitrogen, or are you also discussing phosphorus issues?
We also discuss phosphorus issues, but nitrogen is the most limited nutrient for algae in the coastal areas, and that is have a quite high effect on coastal areas, and that is in focus, while phosphorus is mainly on some lakes in Denmark. Okay. And phosphorus is not that a big problem, but it's still regulated.
Mm-hmm. Of course, yeah. And as I understand it, you are really saying that the actions taken, I mean that wide variety of actions, catch crops, wetlands, etc., with a number of different regulations, it has had an effect. And it has definitely reduced the nitrogen leakage.
Yeah, definitely. As we see, it's the end load to the coastal areas has reduced about 43%.
43%, so that's a lot.
Yeah,
yes. Mm-hmm.
So that's a lot. And mainly in the beginning of this monitoring period, the last 10 years, we haven't seen much effect.
Okay, yeah. And then you mentioned also that the reduction sort of stopped in 2016, and then the leakage increased a bit, and then you had more actions taken in place. So what happened in 2016?
We have a food and agricultural plan that was passed the parliament in 2015, mm-hmm. and we have a mitigation before that the farmers was only allowed to apply 90% of the economic optimum of fertilizer to their field. And this mitigation measure was repealed, so they could apply 100% of the economic optimum.
Okay.
So then to counteract this increase in fertilizer and also increase in leasing, this targeted catch crop was reduced, but there was some time lag. So we see a high surplus in 2016, and then stepwise we see a lower load again.
Okay. Thanks a lot. We'll get back to this when we have the joint discussion. Thanks a lot, Gitte. So we will move on and give the floor to Benoit, who will show us modeling work and what research is going on, looking more in detail about the Danish example. Please, Benoit.
Thank you, Gwen. Good morning, everyone. So allow me now to present some of the research results colleagues and I have been working on. So as you're already now familiar with, we're talking in the context of the impact of agricultural nitrogen to water quality. Our research focuses more precisely on the sustained effect that past practices in agriculture might still have and lag behind. So how much the agricultural system might lag in responding to measures and policies. So looking at the past, how much do we still see that is happening that depends on what's been going on prior? Or if you flip the question, how long of a time you should expect before new policies take full effect, so to say. So our methods to work around this and try to get more understanding is to use data, as you will see, and use that in the context of building numerical models and running simulations to try to understand what has been happening and what we might want to happen in the future. So we work, as you see here. So first question, why Denmark? As you've heard, a lot has been done on the nitrogen issue. So it's a great laboratory where there's a lot of data available and lots of measure that we can, of which we can assess the efficiency or not. So our way of working usually starts with, so we take a long-term perspective. As you see, the results I show you now will be based on about 100-year time simulation from the 1920s to about present. We follow the land use. So in these broad categories, how much of the land has been dedicated to crops, how much has been permanent grasslands, and how much has been other types, more like forests or this type of non-agricultural areas. Then for each of these land types and each year, we make an assessment of how intense has been the nitrogen use, how much has come in, how much has been exported from the land. So as again, that this is specific to each type of land use. And what we try to do with the modeling is to link these events that happen on the field surfaces to the outlet of the rivers and to the coastal water. So as you see here in the box sort of model, this is obviously oversimplified, but we try to understand what are the steps from the fields to the sea. To give you a bit of the scale at which we work at the Watershed scale. So if you look at the map, most of the results, or all the results I will show you today, in the interest of time, will come from this catchment shown in blue on the island of Zeeland. And if you want more details about the model itself, I here have the reference to the publication by colleagues who introduced this model for nitrogen. Let me just walk you in a little bit through our way of working and processing the inputs for these type of models. So the first big important input, as I just stated, is what is the nitrogen surplus every year on the fields. So we have here a simplified surplus calculation where we just factor in what comes into the fields and factor out what's exported from the field. So if you follow me here, in gray, you have some plants who have this capacity to draw nitrogen from the atmosphere by fixation, so it's counted as a positive. You have also from the atmosphere wet and dry deposition from nitrogen, different gases. With the advent of mineral fertilizer, you see the lion's share today is this darker green area, which is the application of nitrogen in mineral fertilizers. Of course, you count in manure. You have a small fraction, but counted as well is how much of represent the seeds that you sow every year to get your crops to grow. And also some components are organic waste or return of sewage sludge and like this. And then from all these positive contribution, you deduct what the nitrogen export via the crops that are sold. So once you do this calculation, you end up, if you look at the graphic on the upper right, with the black line, which is the net effect to the field. So how much the net balance of nitrogen applied to the fields every year. And in this case, that's for the cropland category of the area. So that's one of the main drivers in the model we're using. The other one is climate and mostly the hydrology of a site. And here you have an example of the specific discharge, how much water is carried out by the river every year. And you see the dramatic variability. So we can imagine there will be a difference in nutrient transport between a very dry year or a very wet year, as you see here, which can be quite a large difference. So once you factor these inputs in, you have to calibrate 10 or so parameters for this type of model. And what you obtain is a simulation of what's the river load, so what's coming out at the outlet of the river, how much nitrogen in tons, nitrogen per year. Here you see on the y-axis. We don't use a single model because we can't really figure out what's the exact value for each parameter. It's more in a probabilistic sense. We end up with a family of models that we think realistic enough. So here you see represented 1,000 different models with good quote unquote parameter combinations in gray. So their overlap gives you a sense of the uncertainty in the work we do. And you have the average behavior by this black line. And the red dots are the calibration data, so the monitoring data we have observed and that we can try to reproduce. But what can we do? Sorry. Once we have this type of calibrating models, we can test hypotheses and try to understand what have been the effects of different measure or different events. So I'm now going to show you our estimation of the effects of three types of processes. If you look to the left first, what we see, I'm showing you the atmospheric deposition per year from the 1990 to present. And you see that there's been a decrease in deposition to the land surface by about 10 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year, which means that we're now about half the level we had year 1990, as you can see. So using the calibrated model, we can explore a different pathway where what would have happened, where we see what would have happened if this reduction had not taken place. So we'll compare the actual pathway, which is this line with the dots shown on, versus the dashed line, which is the alternative pathway, had no measures been taken about atmospheric emission and then deposition. So I'll show you more of the results of that on the next slide. A different type of mind experiment, we can say, what would have happened if none of the measures that Gitte described earlier had been put in place? So that's the middle part of this slide now I would like to focus on. So you see the actual pathway, again, with the dotted black line, which is what the data shows has happened in practice. And you see the period from 2005 to 2016, there was a large dip by about 30 kilograms nitrogen per hectare per year in the surplus applied to fields. So we'll test what would have happened if none of this regulation had been put in place and we had just cruised smoothly with about 60 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year as the surplus. So you see this as the dashed blue line. And the third type of effect we can try to test the impact of is, if you look to the right, there was another policy which was to set aside some cropland and have it with a permanent grass cover for a period of year, which was subsidized. So what was the effect of setting this land aside and changing the land use and the nitrogen budget on these areas during the period it was in effect? And that will be the yellow sort of effects you see here. So here is a summary of the effects we think each of these groups of measures have had. So we compare the reference scenario, our calibrated model, with the alternative scenario where we take out one effect or one set of measures. And you see here the reduction of the annual nitrogen river load in each of these comparisons by these bars. So we see that the set-aside policies have had an effect. That's the yellow bars. The largest effect has been this group of measures that have increased the nutrient use efficiency, this blue category. But what I would like to bring your attention to here, you have the time windows where these regulations were most strict, here showed horizontally at the bottom of the graph. And you have a long-lasting effect after this time window of implementation has been sometimes relaxed. So what our research tends to see is that with very strict and strong efforts in limiting nitrogen water pollution, you can sort of reset the system to a new state where you have beneficial effects continuously through time after the most drastic periods of measure maybe have been relaxed. So it's a very, I guess, hopeful message to get that it's possible to have a durable action as we see here in the Danish context. Let me finish maybe with stating that there was great access to data in the Danish context, which is good. So it's really worth it investing in data collection, monitoring, and really that helps the researchers and the practitioners understand what's happening and what's working and what not. So yeah, collect data, fund monitoring programs. That's really important. And now, just before I leave the word again, maybe some outlooks. We see Denmark is an intense agriculture economy. And it's an example we want to take because with the expected effects of climate change, Northern Europe will probably have, we expected that it will be a need to increase food production in the northern latitude compared to present days as the southern ones might turn more arid. So it's important to keep in mind. And what will be our strategic options to make this happen without jeopardizing water quality and the state of the aquatic environment will be, as you see here, which areas can we keep under crop rotation and with the high production? What will be our regulations on fertilization at large? And I will bring your attention to maybe one last fact here. So our agricultural system is a combination of crop and animal production, but I pull here data from the Danish official statistics, but grain use as an example. So you see in the positive part of these graphs how grains are produced either domestically, that's the orange, or imported, that's a smaller share. But most interestingly, on the downside of this, on the lower side of this graph, you see how it's used. And what you see is that the lion's share here is this green area, which is grains that are used to support animal husbandry and dairy and meat production. So we would like to remind that this is not a judgment, but this is a fact of how the system has been designed and what it is geared to produce. So if we want to make our food system more resilient in the future and safeguard water quality in the coastal zones and in the different lake and streams, we might want to use that lever and transition the system towards more plant-based output as relative to today's situation. And maybe I guess we'll come back to this in the discussion now with you, but in the context of increasing mineral fertilizer prices or feed prices, there are, I think, very good examples to take from the organic sector, which has been working with less dependence on these type of inputs and could show us some of the way forward in terms of keeping food production and cutting nitrogen emissions to the water environment. Thank you. Thank you to many colleagues who were involved in this, looking forward to the discussion now.
Thank you, Benoit. Very interesting. Before we get into the general discussion, just a few follow-up questions. Just to simplify, you're actually saying that if there aren't any actions, there will be more leakage. You can really tell that by looking at your models. If you don't do anything, we're going to have a problem, an even larger problem, of course. We can't be content with what we're doing now. Is that also right to say?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think what our work targets and shows is that after a long period maybe of over-fertilization in many contexts, in many regions, you have built these legacies on land that will leak and that will keep being sustained if you keep fertilizing at that level. So what the very interesting Danish experience has shown is with it was strict efforts on fertilization limits, you could put a dent into these legacies and reset the system to a level that's, as Gitte said, not yet satisfactory fully, but much closer there.
Yeah, okay. And also, as you showed in your different modeling, a collection of different measures seems to be the smartest way forward. Different kinds of measures combined, that would give the best effect, right?
Yes, I think so. There is maybe one remark to add here. So with this level of the description in the model, we could test the group of measures. So it's hard for me to tell you which of the manure increased
Yeah.
in use, or which of the fertilization limit keeps it's hard to distinguish those two, but as a group of measures, as we've seen, they've been very effective.
Thank you. So Gitte, please, we will invite you back here and we will just keep on talking together and try also address a number of the questions that has arrived here. So can I just start with one question that has come in, talking about and asking about the acceptance from the Danish farmers? I mean, you gave the suggestions, about a number of different actions that were needed in Denmark. Did the farmers accept this? Was this a political agreement? And did the farmers get paid?
Yes, the farmers accepted. I think they had to. Some of the regulation is that if they don't fulfill the regulation, their subsidized will be cut. So it's quite a detailed regulation with fertilizer accounts and to meet a lot of regulation. The farmers are not subsidized. The only part they were subsidized was the targeted catch crops that was put in after this review of this cotton fertilization, so they could add 100% optimum again.
Okay.
So that was the only subsidized, and it will come out of the table in 2022.
Okay. So that's going to be a part of the new Common Agriculture Policy shift then. Okay, thank you. We have a question here, so I think some details, Benoit, for you. It's a question about what would you say is the residence time for nitrate in soil? Is there accumulation build-up in some soils as with phosphate? Because you mentioned the legacy issue.
Yes, we definitely see an accumulation in the soil, and that's probably where you have the longest legacy effect. Because to give you in the catchments we looked at, the downstream part after it's leached into the water system, you're talking the mean residence time about, our estimation is 35 years in those places. Now, to tell you about the soil, I don't have the figure here, but it also takes a few years to equilibrate to a new fertilization regime. So you definitely see an effect of the storage in the soil component of the nitrogen you applied.
So that's interesting, because we talk a lot about legacy of phosphorus, but less about legacy of nitrate. And then there's just the detailed questions about whether or not your model results are published. They are interested in the time series, but we can make sure that people get the right links to publications, of course.
Yes, well, this is very fresh results, so still unpublished, but should be so in a very short time frame.
That's great, thank you. And then there's a question about if we can say something, both Gitte and Benoit, what about the trend in atmospheric losses of nitrogen from manure? Are there trends, or what's the situation?
Is it the trend in the deposition or what?
Yeah, the question is about the trends in atmospheric losses of nitrogen from manure.
Okay. There is a big trend in the losses, because we use better spreading technique for the manure. So the losses for manure volatilization or ammonia volatilization from agriculture is decreasing stepwise. Okay. And also handling of the slurry tanks to cover them. And so there's still quite a high focus on this ammonia volatilization from manure.
So that's again an example of where good actions has been in place, new techniques, better equipment, etc., and that has reduced the losses then.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then we have a question about, I think, I'm not sure if this is to which one of you. It says, you have shown that the load concentration, kilo N per hectare per year, have decreased. How much is there a climate effect on that, for instance, due to reduced precipitation? Reduced precipitation.
The climate effect on the surpluses is a little bit difficult, because the optimum fertilization will also take into account if the yields are increasing. So if farmers' yield increases and climate effect is higher temperature, then there will be an effect that farmers are allowed to apply more fertilizer.
Okay.
And then this will have an effect on the leaching as well, because this marginal thing about input and output from harvest. So climate effect just only on the yield will have an increase in the leaching.
Yeah. Okay. So would you say, Gitte, that the issue of the climate effects is part of the eutrophication discussion in Denmark? Because I think here, I mean, we're still a bit sort of talking about these things separately.
Actually, in the baseline, we took into account this effect of increase in the yield as a climate effect, but it has another effect is that the precipitation is increasing, and this effect we tried to calculate, but we couldn't apply it on our models, so we didn't. That one was not taken into account for the baseline.
Okay.
But I think that's an issue that we need to stress or have more focus on in the future.
So let's, these last few minutes, let's get back and talk a bit about future and what to do. Because of course we all sort of in our heads talk about, what's next? What kind of policy steps should we take? And as you said, Benoit, you were touching upon the issue of the system of the agriculture structure and everything. If we're really aiming at the SDG goals, we're trying to really solve these problems, what would you suggest? I mean, which steps would you like to see? What would be the next thing to do to actually even further reduce the losses of nutrients?
Should I start?
Yeah, please, Benoit.
Yeah, so as I was hinting in the slides, in my last slide, I think it's time collectively, so with the whole supply chain from farmers to consumers to really act on. I mean, we hear these ideas of more plant-based food systems. It's time to think and how to see how to implement them, how to make it feasible for the producers to transition in that way. How can the customers support this move so that we don't have to? So we rationalize a bit our use of the arable areas we have at our disposal to supply society with food and build resilience to the climate changes we expect and to maybe a more unstable geopolitical solution. So
in other words, even the way we consume should be a part of the eutrophication discussion and not just only talking about leakage.
I think so. I think it's good, for example, with these type of events to spread information on how food production works to the consumers, because it can seem far removed from urban areas, but a lot is happening there that decides the state of our future aquatic environment. And here many factors we want to keep the fisheries healthy so that the whole system is stable and resilient. And it's good that more facts are known and shared about how food is produced, I think.
Okay. So let's look at the broader picture, in other words. Gitte, what would you like to see? What kind of steps?
I think that it will not be enough in Denmark to have focus on the manure and meat production, because the utilization of manure is already so high in Denmark. So we will need other mitigation measures, both those drainage technologies, but also to take area out of agricultural production and re-wetting of organic soils in the river valleys. So we need to combine mitigation measures to also reduce climate change impact with lower inload to the waters.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So because you're also then getting to the system-wise perspective, really, even though many things are being done already within the system, which is excellent, of course. I mean, nobody is against that. All right. So would you say in Denmark there is a policy discussion around this, or is it still, because what you hear about the European level is still about increasing food production, intensity, etc. mostly?
I think that it is other mitigation measures that is in focus. The drain technology, wetlands, afforestation, taking soil out of production, and to regulate food production or meat production is not on the agenda.
Okay. So then, thanks a lot, Benoit and Gitte, for these very interesting presentations. And to the audience, this has been at least a trial to get these issues on the agenda. Thanks a lot to all of you who have been listening. We have had more questions, of course, and I'm very glad for that, and we will try to answer them on the web. So the last Baltic Breakfast is coming up in June. It's going to be on the 8th of June, and that's actually going to be taking place at the hotel in Stockholm, and it's going to be in Swedish, because we are going to talk about what should be done to solve the Baltic Sea issues, and that's an input to the Swedish national election coming up in September. So I hope to see you all in June, and if we don't, have a really nice summer, and of course we will be back also digitally after the summer. Thanks for today.